Welcome back to Dragon Dreams. I'm Ivan, and today, part 3 of things I learned from playing BECMI. Go for awesome. Stay tuned. In my BECMI campaign, I ran the famous Keep on the Borderlands. This is the original adventure module by Gary Gygax, one of the original creators of Dungeons and Dragons. It dates from 1979. It came in the early box sets, and it is a great adventure. I highly recommend it. It's just a ravine with a bunch of caves in it called the Caves of Chaos. There's some wilderness around it. There are a few interesting encounters. And of course, there's the eponymous keep, which is sort of like a town in miniature, as well as being the the final fortress and garrison to stop evil from entering, the kingdom or wherever you're in. And that's pretty much it. And yet, it's one of the best D&D adventures ever written. Okay, so spoiler alert. If you plan to play this adventure, skip ahead for my analysis in just a bit. So, a few minutes forward, because otherwise you're going to get spoilers. Really pops about Keep on the Borderlands is that the caves are interconnected, both literally and figuratively. Let's start with the figurative sense. The Goblin Cave is connected to the Ogre Cave because the goblins outsource their defense to the Ogre. Above the Goblin Cave is the Hobgoblin Cave. The goblins theoretically work for the Hobgoblins, but the Hobgoblins also steal from the goblins. Well, they are evil after all. These particular goblins happen to be kind of dumb, but these particular hobgoblins are really smart. Above the Kobold Cave, there are two orc caves. The kobolds work for one of the orc tribes, which has friction with another orc tribe. So there's all these interconnected rivalries and alliances and things going on in many of the cave complexes are also literally interconnected with secret doors. For example, the two orc tribes turn out to actually be connected because the chiefs of each tribe kind of want back channel parleys, I guess maybe in case they want to gang up on, I don't know, some larger enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, while still sort of allowing this rivalry to kind of go on between them, which sort of makes things interesting. It's like the two orc tribes are theoretically enemies, but also kind of have this weird sort of sometimes parasitic and sometimes symbiotic relationship with each other. A little bit dysfunctional, but they could ally themselves if they chose. At the top of all of these caves is the Temple of Chaos, where an evil cult of human clerics worship some sort of gods of chaos. That's just how they're described, but we can imagine there's some sort of evil deity or deities they worship. Maybe you fill in the blank there. Point is, obviously, the denizens of the lower caves who serve them don't always get along with each other, and it might be a lot of work, we can imagine, for the cult of chaos to whip them all into line. But then again, we see this in Lord of the Rings, where Saruman's half-orcs don't get along with Sauron's orcs, right? Although they may end up allying themselves if Saruman ends up allying himself with Sauron. By the way, I need to totally geek out here because one totally missed opportunity, in my not so humble opinion, in the movies is that they had this bizarre idea that the half-orcs of Saruman are these hybrids between orcs and goblins. Not scary, because what's scary about that? Because goblins are already evil. In the books, the concept was that Saruman was had this mating or breeding program with women from Dunland, which is like a neighboring kingdom, and his orcs. And, like, that's actually scary. Like, that's actually, like, really kind of sinister and creepy. And it made things creepy. So, anyway, end of rant. You get the idea. There's some sort of implied, organization to the Caves of Chaos. It's not just a bunch of random caves with a bunch of random monsters living in it. If you kind of read between the lines, my feeling of what I think Gary Gygax is sort of allowing you to do potentially with the module is the concept that there's this evil cult of chaos that's getting various humanoids, sort of Lord of the Rings style, on its side to make some sort of invasion on whatever kingdom or realm or whatever it is that the keep is guarding. But Gygax is too smart to give you, like, one right, true, and only story. There isn't a story here. There's the potential for lots of different emergent stories to come out, and there's lots of opportunity for the DM, in this case me, to adapt a very generic adventure that's deliberately generic to a campaign. So let me explain how I did that in just a sec. Just to keep you on the thread of this video, I am going to get to the what I learned moment, but in order to get there, let me explain how I adapted this adventure to my campaign, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? So my concept is that there's this cult of the Moon Dragon. They had already played through In Search of the Unknown, which is another one of these early modules from around the same time. It's also a very good introductory module. And so I had this linkage where there was the Cult of the Moon Dragon there. Now, the Moon Dragon is straight out of the BECMI monster listings. She is the kind of immortal goddess or queen of evil dragons, or chaotic dragons, actually, because they have the 3 alignment system. But whatever the case, so it seemed like she's kind of like the Tiamat of this universe. So it seems like just sort of be kind of cool to have her as like this deity that the bad guys worship. All right, and the my campaign setting is Mystara, which was the so-called known world campaign setting for BECMI and BXD&D. And so I had the keep on the northern border of Karamekas along a trade route with the Republic of Daroken. So the purpose of the keep is to keep invaders from coming in to Karamekas. So that's the backstory. And I changed the generic Cult of Chaos, which I think is, as I said, is meant to be adapted to be the Cult of the Moon Dragon, with exactly the idea that I said, which is that the humanoids living in the caves are the minions that they're gathering for the invasion. Actually, it was a little bit more complicated than that. I'm not explaining things exactly the way they were in the campaign, mainly because I don't want to get you bogged down in unnecessary details about my campaign. So those of you who played through this and remember it, obviously you're going to remember that there's like some things I'm not exactly explaining, but you get the idea. The adventure started well enough. The PCs went into several of the caves. They were about second level by the time they finished In Search of the Unknown, which was great because it meant that I didn't need to, funnel them towards the Kobold Cave, which is what most DMs do if it's their very first adventure, because otherwise they'll get slaughtered before they level up. They made several forays. They eventually got to the infamous Temple of Chaos. just enough to poke their noses into it toward the end of a session. And like you're supposed to do, they went back to the keep, but not before the clerics of the Temple of Chaos realized that they were there. Okay, so this is where I kind of didn't do what I think I could have done and had a learning experience. So my instinct at this point for the next session was to have the Temple of Chaos lead all of the denizens of the Caves of Chaos on a nighttime assault on the keep. I even had it all planned out to the tactics they'd use. Of course, the keep has its own defenses. The PCs would then be able to take part in a siege adventure, getting messages through to the Castellan and other commanders, stopping the baddies from entering various gates. There's like an outer gate of the outer bailey and then an inner gate to the inner bailey. And things like that, basically playing pivotal roles in the siege. They may have combat with a small number of evil denizens who are also being fought by the troops of the keep, so that you can set things up so there's like a bunch of troops and like a lot of orcs or hobgoblins or whatever they are, right? And you know, the PCs are kind of like in the middle of like this little battle where a lot of stuff's going on around them. The concept being that if they do well, they could keep the keep from falling, and end up thwarting the attempts by the Temple of Chaos to invade Karamekas. But if they failed, they could fall back and be like, the Castellan could be like, you know, they've taken the keep, you know, like, take these horses and ride as fast as you can to the local baron and tell him what has happened here. You know, the duchy is being invaded. And then they can ride to like the nearby, you know, town or whatever until I don't know remember which barony is closer. But, you know, tell the local baron, you know, what's happened and, you know, whatnot, right? So that was the really awesome idea that I had between sessions. But you know what? They didn't actually do that. Oh, they raided the Temple of Chaos, but they left most of the rest of the Caves of Chaos alone after that and just moved on to the next adventure. In other words, they never actually finished exploring it. They just kind of like figured once they had sacked the temple that they were done and weren't interested in what was in the rest of the caves. So they never actually had the experience that I thought they wanted when they said they didn't want anything too unorthodox. So I then, after that session, between sessions again, I revealed to them what I had planned. And the same player who had at one time said, you know, I don't want anything unorthodox or anything weird, said, oh, wait, that's what you planned? That would have been so cool. I was imagining something different. Meaning that if I had just done what I had planned, they would have had this awesome experience. But I didn't. I went with bland. Lesson learned. Go with your gut. If you think something would be awesome, and your intuition is that your players will love it, it may very well be the right thing to do to not try to turn your table into a democracy, particularly when your players don't actually know what crazy thing you have planned. Just do it. If I had the siege as planned, I honestly think the players would have had a great time. They would have already had several sessions of dungeon crawling. It turns out they were actually bored with that and would have liked a change of pace. They pretty much, I think, got how the Caves of Chaos worked, and they weren't going to waste much time back there anyway. I think my intuition was right. They were kind of done with exploring the caves and wanted something new. it would have mixed things up and shown them a very different type of adventure that you very rarely get. Instead of dungeon crawls all the time, one session would have been a siege adventure. That would have been so cool. Other than that, it would have kept things organic and held to the emergent storytelling that the OSR is so famous for. It would have made the region feel like a real place, that the world responded to what the players do. It would have meant that the PC's actions have consequences for good or for bad. Stick your head into the doings of an evil cult. If they find out you're there, they're coming after you, not waiting for you to get a good night's sleep and make another foray into the dungeon. Now, I probably would have arranged for them to get like just enough sleep to get their spells back. Like maybe the attack would have happened like, pre-dawn or something, just to make it, like a little bit fair on them so they weren't like, depleted of spells. That would have been really wrong. I remember they're still like second level or something like that, so they need all the help they can get. But instead, the finale of that adventure, I felt, was tepid. The cult wasn't a scary organization that responds to you tiptoeing in. It was just a dungeon waiting for another foray. It seemed robotic, more like a computer RPG than a TTRPG. So, lesson learned. If you have an opportunity to do something awesome, and your intuition really is truly that your players will love it, just do it. Worst case scenario, your players hate it and get mad. But then you will have learned something about what they like. It's better risking their displeasure, I think, on something that might well be awesome and be this like highlight of their campaign, this outstanding memory, than keep everything tepid and safe. I'm not saying never ask your players for feedback. Of course, you should have a constant feedback loop from your players so that they're having a good time. I always say, hey, if you guys really think that something I did was unfair, I'm always open. If you really think something I did was a disaster, like, let me know. Like, we can change things. I'm not a robot. I'm not a computer. I'm a human being. Sometimes I make mistakes, but I can also act on feedback, right? But like, we also don't have to turn our game table into like a total democracy where, you were checking in and not even giving them enough information to know the awesome thing we have planned. It's like sometimes you just have to kind of go with your gut, go with your intuition, and do something awesome. All right. So, tell me what you think of all that in the comments. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Please dialogue in a polite way. We don't need to like have arguments like we're on Crossfire or something like that. We don't need to puff up our chests and beat our chests. We can just like have a polite conversation. If you agree or think that was a cool idea, or have you ever done something like this yourself where you did or did not act on your gut feeling about what would be a really cool thing to do? And how did it work out for you? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy dreaming, everybody. All right. See ya.